When my phone buzzed Thursday afternoon at 10 minutes after 4, I knew what the text would say, but I looked anyway. I confirmed it was from Emerson Burke, my private investigator. She's been served. My wife was Martha Harrington. In addition to being a wife, mother, sister, daughter, and friend, she was also a senior partner at Willington and Compton, a prestigious Hartford area law firm. As a senior partner, one of Martha's responsibilities was to manage the caseload of 7 junior partners. She held 2 mandatory meetings per week for the junior partners, Monday mornings at 10 o'clock and Thursday afternoons at 4 o'clock. Each meeting started exactly on time. Anyone arriving late felt Martha's wrath for the entire meeting. The sheriff who delivered the divorce papers to Martha had interrupted the Thursday meeting 2 minutes after 4 and did as instructed. "Mrs. Harrington, your husband is seeking a divorce. You've been officially served." After 23 years of marriage, I knew my wife well. She'd be absolutely humiliated after being served in front of her subordinates. Despite the anger that'd be spreading through her core, she wouldn't rush home. Instead, she'd lock herself in her office and review, as only a skilled attorney can, each word of the divorce petition. I suspected the first reading of the legal papers was more than a little confusing. I listed the classic irreconcilable differences as the reason for the divorce. Martha would be thankful that the reason listed wasn't infidelity, but would suspect I knew something about her long-term affair with Michael Kinsley, a married, 29-year-old associate with her firm. She was also bound to be confused about the division of assets. We'd be splitting the proceeds on the sale of our 7,300-square-foot home and our beachfront summer home on the Connecticut shore. Martha would keep her retirement and I'd keep mine. Banking and checking accounts would be split after our debts were paid. We each made a great deal of money, so there was no need for alimony. She'd be bewildered when she got to the end of the legal papers, and my very successful third-generation engineering firm wasn't listed as an asset. Martha knew my divorce attorney by reputation and had recommended her to a few friends in need of those types of services. She'd commented many times over the years that my attorney was a shark. She'd be stunned that someone who was so well respected in legal circles would be so careless to leave out any mention of the business. I knew she'd suspect a rat, but she'd be stumped as to what the rat was. After a second detailed reading of the petition to confirm that her love buddy, Michael Kinsley, wasn't mentioned, Martha would call an emergency meeting of her most trusted partners and associates. They'd all review the papers and together come up with an initial game plan to deal with her wimp husband, me. My name is Chris Harrington. I met Martha at the University of Connecticut. She was a second-year law school student, and I was finishing my PhD in mechanical engineering. We started dating 1 week after meeting and quickly became exclusive. We were walking to the car after a delicious dinner on our third date. "Chris, let's go to your apartment and get undressed," she answered. We were intimate for the rest of the weekend. I couldn't get enough of her, and she seemed to appreciate the connection we shared as we enjoyed each other's company. We made love daily. Our love life was fantastic and included risky times in bathrooms, at restaurants, or at parties we attended together. We explored several of our fantasies together. I fell in love with Martha. She was the total package. We wholeheartedly agreed that we'd never include others in our love lives and would remain exclusive. We officially confirmed our pledge to each other when we vowed to love, honor, cherish, and remain faithful to each other at our wedding, which took place 2 weeks after we'd both received our advanced degrees. Our wedding was a fairly large affair. It was held in Martha's hometown of Portland, Maine. The reception was under tents on a warm, clear summer night at a wedding venue along the rocky Maine coast. We honeymooned in Aruba, but returned without any tan lines. Martha had started the interview process with several Hartford area law firms prior to graduation. 2 weeks after our return, she was offered a job at Willington and Compton. We spent the next 2 decades falling deeper in love, raising 2 wonderful children, and juggling the responsibilities of career and family. I took over the reins of our family business and bought my dad's shares when he retired 12 years ago. Martha became a junior partner at her law firm 7 years into her career and a senior partner at year 16. Life was great, until I found a turd in the toilet bowl. Just over 3 years ago, I received an anonymous letter in the office. The envelope was addressed to me and the words, "personal and confidential," were scrawled across the bottom. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of notebook paper with the words, "Your wife is in love with Michael Kinsley." There was also a photo of Martha and Michael in the open doorway of what looked like a Fleabag motel. I hired a highly recommended private investigator, and within 2 months, I had a grotesque amount of evidence of Martha's infidelity. After another month of thinking, planning, and pretending to be a loving friend and devoted husband to Martha, I put my team together. The team included my private investigator, a divorce attorney, my business attorney, and my business/personal accountant. I outlined what I wanted and told the group it could easily take a few years until I had everything set up. Their job was to confirm at every step that my actions were legal and couldn't be used against me in our divorce. The second text from my PI came through 10 minutes before 6 that same afternoon. "Michael Kinsley has been served." My private investigator had met with Rachel Kinsley 2 weeks earlier. He'd shared what had become a 3-year investigation and a massive amount of proof of an affair between my wife and her husband. The private investigator recommended my divorce attorney, who would gladly take her case. I imagined that any plans the group at Willington and Compton had come up with to combat my divorce petition were thrown out because Michael's wife had listed infidelity as the reason for her divorce. Her divorce petition included the private investigator's report, photos, and videos. It was a very complete package. The garage door rumbled at 10 minutes after 8 that night. It had been 4 hours since Martha was served, and I silently wondered if my 3 years of planning would trump her war counsel. I was sitting at the head of our 10-person dining room table. A second chair was placed at the opposite end, and all 8 of the other chairs were in the cellar. I'd poured Martha a glass of her favorite red wine and put it on the table in front of her seat. As I heard the door from the garage to the kitchen open and Martha call out, I took my first sip of slightly chilled bourbon. The clackety-clack of her heels on the tiled kitchen floor indicated she first looked into the family room, then my office, and finally the living room before I saw her in the archway to the dining room. Martha looked at me, surveyed the setup, and then moved to the chair at the far end of the table. After sitting, she reached for the glass, toasted me with thanks for the wine, and took a long pull. It took a few beats before she spoke. "I don't want a divorce," she finally spoke. "I know, and I don't want a cheating woman for a wife," I roared. "Chris, please, let's talk like adults. Yes, I've had an affair, but I'm not a cheating woman," I countered. "I'll bet you've told me 50 times over the years that only a cheating woman would allow a man to have her back. Those are your words, Martha." I didn't have to say I had a great deal of evidence that Martha had done that. At least once a month for the last few years while never giving me the pleasure of doing so. I could tell Martha wanted to lash out. Her face was red, and she was breathing through her mouth. I watched as she purposely calmed herself. "Why did you have to ruin Michael's family? He has 2 wonderful children who will now grow up without a father at home," she answered. I actually had to choke back a laugh, shook my head, and calmly replied, "Have you seen Rachel Kinsley? She's a knockout. Her kids will have a new father at home soon enough, and I'll guess he won't be a cheating jerk like your lover." I paused for a short time, then continued. "Why would I give a crap about that guy's family? He didn't care about my family, other than you." Martha clenched her jaw and hissed. "I've politely asked you to speak to me like an adult. Your bad language isn't helping." I broke a smile, which I knew unnerved her. "Martha, I'm not trying to help the situation. If you don't like my language, you can get up and leave. I promise, on all that's holy, I won't stop you from leaving." As I knew would happen, Martha didn't budge. "How long have you known?" she asked. Rather than answer her questions, I looked through the props that I'd placed in front of me prior to Martha's arrival. I picked up a copy of the anonymous material that had been delivered to my office and pushed it across the table. Martha took out the short letter and the photo. After examining them, she looked at the face of the envelope and read the postmark. 3 years? You've known for 3 years? But you haven't done anything? She asked. I chuckled. Believe me, I've done a lot, Martha. You had a 4-hour meeting at work today to prepare for this talk. I've had 3 years to prepare, I roared. When I finished that sentence, I saw a shadow of deep concern cross Martha's face, but I didn't want to go there yet. I continued. For instance, we haven't had intimacy since I found out. Other than a peck on the cheek, we hardly ever have intimate contact. It's been 3 years since you and I have had a loving hug and you haven't even noticed. I thought you'd lost interest in love. That comment got a belly laugh. I only lost interest in love with you, I roared. Martha thought for a couple of seconds. Have you really gone 3 years without love? She asked. I smiled from ear to ear. I've gone 3 years without love, with you. I've had plenty of intimacy, and if the videos I've seen are any indication, I've enjoyed love with my many partners far more than you have. Martha was stunned as she sat back in her chair. I continued. The difference is, I have video proof of much of your messing around. You don't have the same proof against me. Chris, I love you and I always have. My time with Michael meant nothing. It was simple stress relief, especially after you stopped having intimacy with me, she pleaded. Don't go there, Martha. Your ongoing weekly 3-year affair is your fault. Don't you dare try to blame me, I replied. Martha took a full minute to calm down and then continued. Regardless, I love you and I know you love me, she answered. You're wrong, Martha. For 3 years you've constantly lied to me. You've smashed our wedding vows and cheated on me. You've degraded and humiliated me in the worst ways possible. It took a while for the love to fade, but I don't love you. In fact, I don't even like you anymore. The tears Martha had kept in check spilled from her eyes as she jumped to her feet and ran from the room. I didn't bother following because I knew she'd be back. I suspected she'd return in attack mode, and I wasn't wrong. Martha had changed into jeans and a blouse before she came back. She sat and refilled her glass from the bottle of wine I'd left at her end of the table. Chris, I think you really need to rethink things. I've got a great team at the office, and with the help of an outside divorce attorney, you'll lose a great deal. I know Sharon Brown, Sharon was my attorney, is a good lawyer, but I've already found some glaring mistakes in the petition she prepared. If we can't come to some kind of decision on how you and I can move forward, I'll unleash my team on you. My smiles and laughs were taking a toll on Martha. Once again, I smiled broadly. That's the difference between your team and my team. Your team will be unleashed in the morning. My team has been slowly and methodically implementing my plan for 3 years. Your team starts the war tomorrow, but my team's work is done. I let that sink in before I continued. I'll take you at your word that you love me. I'm not sure how that's possible due to the 3 years of deceit, but I'll accept you love me. I can almost guarantee that by the time our divorce is granted, you're going to hate my guts. The funny thing is, everything you'll hate me for has already happened. You just don't know about it yet, Martha hollered. You'll never be able to turn our kids against me. I'd never try to turn the kids against you. In fact, I haven't talked to the kids. I plan to call them over the weekend, along with both sets of parents and our siblings. I'm going to tell them that I've filed for divorce because of your long-term affair. I'll tell the kids and my family that I expect them to treat you with respect and hopefully they'll continue their relationship with you. But it's completely up to them. If anyone doesn't believe the depth of your betrayal, I'll offer to send them a private investigator report. I suspect you don't want them to see it, so you might want to simply confirm your affair. Martha hated losing, and she was starting to understand she was way behind and losing more ground with each verbal volley. Instead of backing down, though, she exploded. "I'm going to take your company away from you," she screamed. The first half of my destruction of Martha had just been launched. She expected a threat against my firm would be her ace in the hole, but instead, I sent her attack back at her. "My company? What company is that?" I asked innocently. She looked at me as if I had two heads and sneered. "Precision engineering, I'm going to take it over," she answered. My grin lasted a while. In fact, she shouted before I answered. "What?" she asked, confused. I spoke with the most condescending voice I could muster. "Sweetheart, don't you remember? We sold precision engineering to the Swedes 2 years ago." "That's illegal and I'll have your back. The company is a family asset and I didn't agree to the sale," she answered. "I didn't say you agreed to the sale. However, you did give me a very broad power of attorney for all things to do with the company. In fact, your firm wrote the document. I used the power of attorney to complete the sale and invest the money in overseas accounts. As you do each year, you personally signed our family tax documents, which clearly listed the sale and movement of money. Good luck finding the money after 2 years." Martha was shell-shocked. As she sat there, her mouth moved like a goldfish blowing bubbles. I got up, left the room, and walked upstairs to our guest room. After locking the door, I stripped to my boxers, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally cried. My alarm went off at 3 o'clock the next morning. I climbed out of bed, showered, and left for the airport to fly to Florida. In preparation for my single life, I'd purchased a condo on Clearwater Beach, across the bay from Tampa. I'd shocked Martha on that fateful night. I expected it'd take Martha and her legal team a few weeks of combing through legal documents and financial statements before they understood that close to $34 million from the sale of precision engineering had never come under the jurisdiction of a U.S. bank, and therefore wouldn't be part of the divorce settlement. Yes, that was truly a shock. If a lifetime of family tradition was any indication, the awe half of my plan would happen in 5 weeks, on the Friday after Thanksgiving. While growing up, Martha was extremely close to her maternal grandmother, Edith. Edith would plan a weekly outing for only the two of them. As the decades passed, Martha took over the planning. In recent years, Martha drove to Portland, Maine once a month to visit with her and take her from her assisted living facility. They'd go to lunch and, if Edith was well, the mall. A family tradition, started by Edith and continued by Martha for the last 15 years, was to display a nearly 175-year-old family nativity scene at Christmas. Each year, on the Friday after Thanksgiving, Martha would go to our local bank and take the 24 figurines, which made up the nativity scene, from a very large safety deposit box. Each figurine was encased in a velvet box. The kids and I would go out and pick 2 12-foot Christmas trees. It'd take our family an entire day to decorate our home. The highlight of our decorating was the nativity scene centered on a straw-covered table that was bookended by the 2 trees. 3 rows of poinsettia flowers were placed in front of the table to protect the incredibly valuable figurines from the roving hands of our guests. With all of the decorations in place, Martha would stand in front of her beloved nativity scene, and, without fail, tears would run down her cheek. In fact, over the course of the holiday season, Martha would cry on a daily basis every time she looked at the scene. She admitted it was her happy place, and it reminded her of all of the joys in her life. The scene overwhelmed her with past and present memories. We left the decorations in place until the day before we went back to work after the holiday season. On that day, we'd reverse the process, and the family would put all of the decorations away. Martha would tenderly box each figurine and place them on the kitchen counter. The following day, she'd stop at the bank on the way to work and put the boxes back into the safety deposit box for safekeeping until they were needed the following year. Most of my plans to divorce Martha didn't take 3 years to complete. All but one element was completed during the first year. Over the last 3 years, I'd planned a business trip for the start of the new year. My flight wouldn't leave until around noon, so instead of going into the office, I started my day in my home office. For the first 2 years, Martha and I had breakfast together on that first day of work. I'd help her carry the boxed figurines to her car, she'd wish me well and give me a kiss on the cheek, and leave for the bank before going to work. Last year, at long last, the plan changed slightly to what I'd been waiting for. As we dressed, Martha asked, "Chris, can you do me a favor?" I looked across our bedroom and responded, "Sure." "I expect a pile of work when I get in this morning. Do you have the time to take the figurines to the bank before you go to the airport?" she asked. I thought for a second and smiled. "That'll be easy enough. I'll take care of it," I replied. As I guessed it would happen, Martha's text arrived just before noon on Friday, immediately after Thanksgiving. Martha: "Where the hell are my figurines, you jerk?" I laughed so hard that coffee flew from my nose as Kate, a 38-year-old divorcee neighbor, was walking outside of my bedroom and saw the stream of coffee fly. She laughed along with me. "Do you need to answer that text, or can you give me a quick time before I have to leave?" We'd already had intimacy after we first woke, but I suspected, with a little help from Kate's world-class skills, I could go another round. Kate took a quick shower, dressed, gave me a kiss, and left for home. After she left, I checked my phone and found several texts and phone calls from Martha, her family members, and our kids. Although I didn't want to talk to Martha, I decided it'd be far easier to call her than to talk to everyone else. Martha hissed when she answered her cell. "What the hell took you so long to call back?" "I was with one of my neighbors, Martha," I roared. Martha took a moment to calm herself and continued. "I want my nativity scene and I want it now," she asked. "Sure, go to the bank and get it," I replied. "Chris, I know you didn't take them back to the bank last year. The last record for accessing the safety deposit box was when I took the figurines out last Christmas." Before she could continue, I asked, "Why didn't you return them last year?" "As you clearly know, you agreed to take them to the bank for me. Please, Chris, please, give my treasures back to me," she pleaded. "I'm sorry, Martha, but you're wrong. I remember putting the boxes in the trunk of your car before you left for work. The same as almost every other year. What are you trying to pull, Martha?" I questioned. Martha sobbed. "Oh, God, why are you doing this to me? I know you're angry, but why would you be this awful to me?" she once again pleaded. "It's amazing that you refuse to take any responsibility for your messed up life. Goodbye, Martha." I hung up the phone. I decided to reach out to everyone who'd called. I phoned them with the same message: "Martha is trying to cause problems as our court date approaches." I'm not sure if anyone believed me, but I was positive no one had proof that I had the figurines. Our divorce was finalized 14 months after I filed. Martha fought it at every turn and threw up roadblock after roadblock. She also got the police and insurance investigators involved in the disappearance of her nativity scene. My only comment on the matter was, as I recall, I put all 24 boxes of figurines into the trunk of Martha's car. I would have been shocked if anyone believed me, but they couldn't prove I took Martha's family heirloom. Martha and I saw each other a few times a year at events hosted by our children. We were respectful of each other but tried to keep our distance. 14 years after our divorce, I found out Martha had been fighting a losing battle with an aggressive form of breast cancer. As Martha's days were coming to a close, my daughter called and asked if I'd visit her mother. When I entered her hospice room the next day, Martha was sleeping. I watched her for almost an hour and had to fight back tears on a number of occasions as I took a walk down memory lane. I must have been daydreaming because she startled me. "You were right, you know." I looked up at the smiling face of my only bride and smiled back. Of course. I was always right. But out of curiosity, "What are you talking about?" I asked. Her smile flickered as she spoke. "You told me that my love for you would turn to hate by the end of the divorce. After all of the awful things I did to you and our family, I'm embarrassed to tell you I hated you for a long time." "Right back at you, Martha," I answered. Her smile came back and we chuckled together. "Chris, do you still hate me?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "No. For me, hate takes too much energy. I didn't have the strength after a while. How about you?" I asked. Martha had started to nod in agreement before I finished my sentences. "I agree. After a while, hate isn't worth the effort," she answered. We talked for close to 2 hours. I was finishing a very old story about when our kids were young, and when I looked up, I saw Martha had fallen asleep. My first inclination was to leave, but I reconsidered when I realized that, in all likelihood, it'd be the last time I'd see her alive. Martha and I continued reminiscing after she woke up from her hour-long nap. We were laughing together like fools as our son, Brian, his wife, Sue, and our 3 grandchildren walked in. I could instantly tell that Brian was pleased that I was visiting his mom. I didn't stay much longer as I wanted Brian and his family to have Martha's undivided attention. I said my goodbyes and gave Martha a soft kiss on the lips. As I turned toward the door, Martha called out to me, "Chris, can I ask you a favor?" After I gave her a short nod of agreement, Martha looked at Brian. "Would you give your dad and me a moment of privacy?" she asked. Brian and Sue gathered up their kids and made a quick exit. When the 2 of us were alone, Martha continued, "I'd like Brian's family and Rose's family to alternate displaying the nativity scene on Christmas. Do you think you could help make that possible?" While many families spent the Friday after Thanksgiving looking for bargains at the local mall, my family spent the day at my daughter's home. Rose's family, along with her brother Brian and his family and me, spent the day decorating the house. Candles and wreaths went on each window, lights went on the bushes that surrounded the front yard, and Christmas-themed knickknacks were spread throughout each first-floor room. We all agreed that the showcase decoration was in Rose's family room. We decorated 2 large 12-foot trees and put a straw-covered table between them. In front of the table, 3 rows of poinsettias provided a protective barrier, and scattered over the top of the table were the 24 pieces of Martha's nativity scene. Before I left for the evening, Brian and Rose joined me as I took one last look at the figurines. Tears rolled down my cheek when I remembered Martha, so many years ago, as she stood in front of the display, crying and saying it was her happy place. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.